talk to you for a minute about synthetic blood, and then we'll talk about politics. If I develop a stroke, please just rush me. With enough time for a blood transfusion. The search for synthetic blood. The Philippine population is becoming old. Over the coming decade, we shall have more and more senior citizens who are likely to suffer from chronic and debilitating diseases. At the same time, there will be fewer and younger donors. Thus, the search for more blood is a long-term concern. There is a quiet but strong need to augment the regular blood supply, particularly during times of shortage. Shortages occur when people are on holiday or when there is a sudden increase in demand. In the words of Professor Mark Turner, Rector of the Edinburgh University Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service, quote, "We are not 100% dependent. We are 100% dependent on our blood donors and on generosity, and that is not going to change anytime soon." One problem is that blood shortage occurs not only in the Philippines, but also in the entire third world. The developed world has a blood donor base far bigger than that of the developing world. Experts recently said that there are over 100 million units of blood collected around the whole world each year, but around 60% go to developed countries. Another key issue of our time is transfusion-transmitted infections. In the past, many countries had to deal with infections like HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. Now, the new testing regimes render the blood supply very secure, and yet there are always new emergent infections on a worldwide basis. Hence, all Filipinos should support our country's national blood program. I shall try to survey very briefly the history of the search for synthetic blood. In 2009, sigurado ba tayo na hindi pa na nanggol yung mga kasama sa Kongreso, yung mga senador, dapat may blood test bago sila pumasok sa Kongreso. Manigat ang blood nila eh. It's not only their blood, it's their brains. In 2009 in Britain, scientists announced that they had launched what would possibly unlimited amounts of synthetic human blood from embryonic stem cells for blood transfusion. In effect, a project would produce synthetic blood made from the stem cells of spare IVF embryos. The goal is to revolutionize vital blood transfusion services so that they would no longer rely on a network of human donors. The researchers tested human embryos left over from IVF treatment to find those that are genetically programmed to develop into the O-negative blood group, which is, as you know, the universal donor group. Its blood can be transfused into anyone without fear of tissue rejection. But this proposal involved the destruction of embryos to create stem cells. Thus, it raised difficult ethical and philosophical questions, specifically of whether the synthetic blood will have come from someone who never existed. 2 years later, in 2011 in China, scientists announced they could use rice to make albumin, a protein found in human blood. Albumin is often used for treating burn trauma, shock, and liver disease. The expert said that blood protein from rice is both physically and chemically equivalent to blood-derived human serum albumin, or HSA. The Chinese were genetically engineered rice seeds to produce high levels of HSA. Then they purified the protein from the seeds. But at the same time, the researchers said that more research is needed to evaluate the safety of the rice-derived protein in animals and humans before it could be considered for the market. In the same year, 2011, at the University of Paris, a team of researchers succeeded in producing blood cells in a Petri dish that would serve as backup blood supply. The researchers used hematopoietic stem cells, or HSCs, that give rise to all blood cell types. HSCs were obtained from a human donor. The researchers managed to generate billions of red blood cells, which are called CRBCs, in culture and get them back into the donor body. Incredibly, the lifespan and survival rate of the cultured cells imitated the way that blood from a human donor is introduced into the donor body. The researchers said, quote, "The results from our study established the feasibility of the concept of transfusing CRBCs and show promise that an unlimited blood reserve is within reach," unquote. In 2010, in the United States, the Pentagon reported that scientists working for an experimental agency managed to develop artificial blood for use in transfusion for wounded soldiers in battlefield. The artificial blood is made from hematopoietic stem cells from discarded human umbilical cords. These stem cells are turned into large quantities of red blood cells. It uses a method called blood farming, not F-A-R-M, but P-H-A-R-M, blood farming, that mimics the functions of bone marrow. The researchers define farming as, quote, "a method of using genetics on engineered blood of animals to create medically useful substances in large quantities." They said that, for example, using this process, the cells from one umbilical cord could produce about 20 units of blood, enough for over 3 transfusions for an injured soldier. At that time, 2010, the scientists said that a unit of blood, which is around a pint, would cost $1,000, which at that time was much less than the price of $5,000. Last year, 2012, in Stanford University, researchers found that young blood can reverse some effects of aging based on research. Kaya ganyan ang Senado at ang Kongreso dahil mga matatanda na sila. Their brains no longer work. This thesis, kaya dapat pagkain sa kanilang kabata. That's the result of this survey. This thesis was proposed after a study showing that blood from young mice improved learning and memory in older mice and increased connections between brain cells. It also showed that the number of stem cells in the brain had increased. Professor Sol Villeda, who led the research team, said, quote, "At some point in the future, people in their 40s or 50s would take therapies based on the rejuvenating chemical factor in younger people's blood against the debilitating issues of aging." My personal comment on this particular development is that it can speed up the population of vampires. Ay, kung may ganyan na pala, ikainin na natin lahat ng mga bata. This year, in May 2013 in Scotland, scientists were able to obtain permission to conduct the world's first trials in humans of synthetic blood. Its goal is to use stem cells to improve blood. On an individual scale, the researchers said they would concentrate in stem cells from adult donors and no longer on the controversial embryonic cells. These stem cells from adult tissues are known as induced pluripotent stem cells. The cells are taken from an adult and specifically tested so that they can regress to a state with qualities similar to embryonic stem cells. The scientists hope that they move away from embryonic stem cells